The charcoal industry has made a strong comeback in Malaysia, destroying large expanses of redwood. Over 60% of the charcoal goes to Japan as raw material for making cosmetics. Now there are more than 300 charcoal factories in the Perak state where most of the redwood forests are found. The redwood trees are fallen cut into about 1.6 meter long logs put into the kiln to bake for about a week before the kiln is sealed up for burning for another week and cooled. The charcoal making techniques were left by Japanese colonialists. Now the Mitsu village still bears the name of the Japanese charcoal company. The Perak state boasts about 41,510 hectares of redwood forest under protection. The young trees cannot be used to make charcoal. Generally, only those at least 30 years old are qualified for making charcoal. Hei Shun, the boss of a charcoal factory, says Japan does not have the raw material. They do not have such rosewood forests, so they don't have the material to make the charcoal. Hei Shun has been in the trade for 30 years. He said the local charcoal industry was returned to the Malaysian government in 1965 and it staged a comeback starting from the beginning of the 1980s. It is learned that apart from the charcoal, the byproducts and the carbonaceous water distilled from the process also go to Japan for use in making cosmetics.
Beijing on Tuesday downplayed comments in Indian media that China was deciding to divert one of India's most important rivers. Speaking at the Foreign Affairs Ministry briefing in Beijing, spokesperson Hong Lei said China's response to water development was responsible. Last year, Beijing announced the construction of a $1.2 billion hydroelectric power station on the Brahmaputra, the lifeline of India's northeastern state, Assam. The $1.2 billion Zangmu Dam was the first on the mainstream of the 2,880-kilometer-long Brahmaputra, which was started last November and hailed in official media as a landmark priority project. Indian media reported Beijing was planning further water diversion projects on the river. The blame game is rooted in the fear that China's accelerating program of damming every major river flowing from the Tibetan Plateau will trigger natural disasters, degrade fragile ecologies, divert vital water supplies, and could be even used as a weapon. Beijing gave no notice when it began building 3 dams on the Mekong River, which flows into Vietnam, the first of which was completed in 1993.
Syrian people who fled the crackdown in Jizra al-Shaq have been slipping across Turkey to buy food for their families. Hundreds of Syrians escaping the violence have set up camp near the Turkish border on Tuesday, but they are struggling to feed themselves there. One of them says they are all alive, but there is no food for their family, and the rain is having a very bad effect on them. They walked up to the Turkish town of Govesi, bought food, and headed back to Syria. There are some 6,000 Syrians who have already crossed into Turkey and not gone back. The refugees in Turkey are living in tent communities in Boynu Yogand, Altinozu, and Yeiladagi with the help of the Turkish Red Crescent. Jizra al-Shaq had been deserted in the last few days as troops led by President Bashar Assad's brother pushed ahead against a reported mutiny in this town near the Turkish border. Jizra al-Shaq is the first town to spin out the government control since the uprising began in mid-March. Government soldiers regained control of it on Sunday.
Australia's Prime Minister refused to meet the Dalai Lama during his visit to Parliament House in Canberra, while insisting that the refusal had nothing to do with Chinese pressure on world leaders to shun the exiled Tibetan spiritual leader. Australian PM Julia Gillard attracted criticism from within her own government for announcing yesterday that she would not meet Tibetan spiritual leader Dalai Lama. Speaking to reporters in Canberra, the Dalai Lama said he was not disappointed by Gillard's decision and indicated that he had been unaware that Australia's leader was a woman. He twice referred to the Prime Minister as a man during the news conference before he was corrected. Dalai Lama said that if Gillard has some kind of spiritual interest, their meeting would be useful. Otherwise, he would have nothing to ask her, as Gillard is an atheist. Australian prime ministers have held low-key private meetings with the Dalai Lama in the past, which have irritated China. Greens leader Senator Bob Brown met the Dalai Lama and had been lobbying Gillard to do the same. Gillard did not provide reasons for her decision, despite acknowledging last month that Australians expected their leaders to receive the revered Nobel Peace Prize winner. She also insists that it had nothing to do with China's dislike of the Dalai Lama. The 75-year-old Buddhist monk held a private meeting with Education Minister and former rock star Peter Garrett as the government's representative, as well as meeting conservative opposition party leaders. Some lawmakers have accused Gillard of being out of step with Australia's most important defense ally, the United States, where the Dalai Lama has met President Barack Obama. However, some analysts have suggested that Gillard is trying to demonstrate her independence from the Green Party, a vocal critique of China's control of Tibet, and a crucial supporter of the ruling Labour Party.
U.S. action to denounce China's behavior over Spratly Islands conflict agitates Philippines, since it could lead to a more deep rift in the ASEAN bilateral relationship. U.S. Senator Jim Webster, leading the subcommittee in East Asia, urged Congress to condemn China's aggressive behavior in the maritime conflict, as well as expressed concerns over the Philippines. Webb did not call for the United States to take an explicit position in this sea, land, and oil-rich archipelago, but to seek for a peaceful resolution to disputes. The U.S. merely denounced China for provoking the incidents. The director of the University of the Philippines Center for Policy and Executive Development said the Philippines has staged a different proposal on the matter, stressing that the U.S. should not get involved. It should not be treated as a bilateral issue between the Philippines and China, but a problem to be solved multilaterally and regionally among ASEAN countries and China. In an important statement of Congressman Walden Bello of Akbayan, he concurred that calling on the United States to help them would just enable them to contract more concessions from us. The strategy, he meant, is to rely on ASEAN, the region that the Philippines truly belongs, not on Washington. Some analysts have suggested ASEAN and China should be incorporated as one bloc to prevent further non-regional influence that could aggravate any matter. The maritime Spratly conflict has been a heating issue between Southeast Asian countries, the Philippines, Vietnam, Brunei, and Malaysia, and China for a certain period of time.
Now we have a special report about the 150th birthday anniversary of Rapintarana Thakun in Thailand.
Chulalongkorn University celebrates the 150th birth anniversary of Rapintarana Thakun with a two-day international conference. Rabindranath Tagore's 150th anniversary this year is something to celebrate for the Thai Indian community in Bangkok. Tagore visited Siam only once, but he left his mark. Widely touted as a pioneer of Thai-Indian cultural relations, Tagore is considered by many as the man who started what's become a long sustainable relationship between Thailand and India. During his visit to the kingdom in 1927, King Rama VII requested Tagore to provide an Indian philosopher to help strengthen the cultural ties between the two countries. The poet later sent Prafulla Kumar Sen as a cultural ambassador who went on to found the Thai Bharata Ashram in Bangkok. This and other aspects of Tagore's life and works will be explored in detail in a two-day international conference celebrating the 150th birth anniversary of the poet starting this Thursday at Chulalongkorn University. The event is being organized by the university in collaboration with the Indian Council for Cultural Relations in New Delhi and the Indian Embassy in Bangkok. Speakers include Professor Sugata Bose from Harvard, Professor Saranindranath Tagore from National University of Singapore, who is the poet's great-grandnephew, and Supriya Roy from Rabindranath Bhavana Library. During the course of an eventful life spanning 8 decades, Tagore won international acclaim as a playwright, poet, songwriter, novelist, educator, philosopher, and humanist. He became the first Asian to win the Nobel Prize in 1913. The great man wrote over 2,000 songs and created Rabindranath Sangeet, a form of music and a genre of Bengali music that is named after the poet himself. In poetry, he wrote over 50 volumes, the best known internationally of which is Gitanjali, which he translated from Bengali to English. His short stories and novels occupied a place of their own in Bengali literature. In a celebrated song, he described himself as restless and thirsty for the distant unknown. The world was a crucible for cultures for him, from which the universal man could find nourishment. Even at the age of 71, he was able to fulfill a childhood dream of being an Arab Bedouin when he flew on the Dakota plain to Brashear and went on to spend a day in a Bedouin encampment in the desert of the outskirts of Baghdad. From these travels, Tagore brought back ideas which he introduced to his students at Wiswa Bharata. For Tagore, his travels were inspired by a divine design. In his Nobel acceptance speech, he mentioned that it was a miracle that brought him to the West before the World War.
Thailand to host the World Economic Forum on East Asia next year, and many more economic news after the breaks.